Okay, so today we'll be annotating chapter 6 of Jekyll and Hyde. So this is the remarkable incident of Dr. Lanyon. Notice how lots of the chapters kind of tell you what's going to happen in it. You know, we know there's going to be something about Lanyon, and we know it's going to be something quite remarkable. So already, it's building our anticipation as a reader. Something, what, strange is going to happen here to Lanyon? Let's find out. Time ran on. So we're not kind of told how much time at this point, but some time has passed since the last chapter. This whole novel kind of skips over time quite quickly. Usually at the beginning of chapters like this, it kind of tells you that time moves on. Thousands of pounds were offered in reward, for the death of Sir Danvers was resented as a public injury. So the public has been hurt by this murder of Danvers, and loads of money's been offered in reward for the capture of Hyde. So it's a reward for Hyde. But Mr. Hyde had disappeared out of the ken, and ken just means the view. Out of the ken of the police, as though he had never existed. So it's like he's disappeared. Did he even exist? Much of his past was unearthed, indeed, and all disreputable. So it's all kind of disreputable, which kind of means stuff that morally, it's like let's put here, morally kind of corrupt. And by morally, I mean kind of right and wrong. So it's like he's been doing lots of despicable things. And to quote the guy we watched a video of, this bit, it really is. It's about unspeakable kind of things that he's been doing. Tales came out of the man's cruelty. So he was a cruel individual, at once so callous and violent. So he's a callous and violent individual. Of his vile life, of his strange associates, of the hatred that seemed to have surrounded his career, that everyone hated him, these strange associates, his vile life. So again, we don't get the specifics. We know he killed Carew. We know he trampled over the girl, but all of these things he's been up to, these dodgy dealings and dodgy behaviour, we're not told any of it. It's all unspeakable, and it's left to us as the reader to fill in the gaps about what he's been up to. Okay, and particularly, a Victorian reader might have been thinking things about, with prostitutes, murder, kind of things that are happening late at night in London, the dark side of the city. But of his present whereabouts, not a whisper. From the time he had left the house in Soho on the morning of the murder, he was simply blotted out. We get this recurring kind of metaphors of writing. We've had the Satan signature written on his face. We've had the autograph of the murderer in the last chapter. A common sort of metaphor that Stevenson uses is this idea of writing. Okay, often that pops up. And gradually, as time drew on, Mr. Utterson began to recover from the hotness of his alarm and to grow more at quiet with himself. So Utterson, he's less curious. He's calmed down from the whole affair, which made him quite hot, and that's quite interesting. It made him hot. The death of Sir Danvers Carew was, to his way of thinking, more than paid for by the disappearance of Mr. Hyde. So he's kind of glad, like, if Hyde's out of the world, no one else can get hurt, I can live with that. Although, still, Hyde really should be arrested, shouldn't he, for his murder? Now that the evil influence, there's that lovely little quote there, that evil influence, great, quote for Hyde, one I haven't actually noticed before. Good quote. Now that evil influence had been withdrawn, a new life began for Dr. Jekyll. He came out of his seclusion, so he had been shutting himself away, and now he's coming out of it. Renewed relations with his friends, became once more their familiar guest and entertainer, and whilst he had always been known for charities, he was now no less distinguished for religion. So he becomes quite religious. And remember, earlier on he was saying God, he was repeating the word God a lot when he was talking to Utterson in the previous chapter. So he's found God. And he's become himself again. He's that Dr. Jekyll at ease from the earlier chapter. He's no longer the deadly sick Jekyll that we saw in the last chapter. He was busy. He was much in the open air. He did good. So he's doing charitable things, for society. He's helping society, Jekyll, at this point. His face seemed to open and brighten, as if with an inward consciousness of service. And for more than 2 months, the doctor was at peace. So for 2 months, the Doctor is a good man. So Jekyll is good for 2 months. He's charitable and generous. And charity would have been seen at the time, Victorian society, as a real virtue. Okay, so like virtue, virtue. A virtue is kind of like a characteristic that's a good thing. On the 8th of January, Utterson had dined at the Doctor's with a small party. Lanyon had been there, and the face of the host had looked from one to the other, as in the old days when the trio were inseparable friends. So, all's good in the world again. Utterson, Lanyon, and Jekyll having dinner together, having a laugh like the old days. On the 12th, and again on the 14th, the door was shut against the lawyer. The Doctor was confined to the house, Paul said, and saw no one. On the 15th, he tried again, and was again refused. And having now been used for the last 2 months to see his friend almost daily, he found this return of solitude to weigh upon his spirits. The 5th night he had in guests to dine with him, and the 6th he betook himself to Dr Lanyon's. So after this 2 months of charitable good-naturedness, he's out and about, he goes back into his solitude. He locks himself away, and as Paul says, he will see no one. He's not admitting any visitors. He's shut himself away. He's confined to the house. A good little quote there as well. He will not leave the house. He doesn't want to see Utterson. He doesn't want to see Lanyon. So he decides to go see Dr. Lanyon to see, like, do you know what's wrong with Jekyll? There at least he was not denied admittance. But when he came in, he was shocked at the change which had taken place in the Doctor's... Let's move over. The Doctor's appearance. He had his death warrant written legibly upon his face. Lovely, again, a lovely metaphor about kind of writing a death warrant, something that people sign. You know, I think King Charles I, people signed his death warrant. It's where people sign like a legal document saying that this man is going to die. And Lanyon here has it written all over his face. This metaphor, again, that Stevenson uses again and again. The rosy man had grown pale. So often Stevenson uses the word pale to sort of show how people become afraid and how they change. His flesh had fallen away. He was visibly balder and older. So he loses his hair. He's aging. And yet it was not so much these tokens of a swift physical decay that arrested the lawyer's notice, as a look in the eye and quality of manner that seemed to testify to some deep-seated terror of the mind. So in his mind, there's some sort of great fear that has had an effect on him, and it's put this terror in his mind. It was unlikely that the Doctor should fear death, and yet that was what Utterson was tempted to suspect. Yes, he thought, here's a Doctor. He must know his own state, and that his days are counted, and the knowledge is more than he can bear. And yet when Utterson remarked on his ill looks, it was with an air of great firmness that Lanyon declared himself a doomed man. So it's like, because Lanyon... I'm just going to just try and sharpen up a bit the image. Because Lanyon knows he's going to die, suddenly out of nowhere, Lanyon, a fit and healthy man, suddenly we don't know why, he's completely changed. Physically he's started to decay and get older, not like outrageously older, but just a bit older. And it's almost like he knows he's going to die. And then he says this: I have had a shock, he said, and I shall never recover. So something's happened to him, some kind of shock, which he'll never recover from. It is a question of weeks. Well, life has been pleasant. I liked it. Yes, sir, I used to like it. I sometimes think if we knew all, we should be more glad to get away. So interesting, this is really mind-blowing for Utterson. He turns up to his friend and he's saying, I'm going to die in a few weeks. Life has been pleasant. I liked it. Yes, sir, I used to like it. So he really enjoyed life until something happened. But this is classic Stevenson. He shows us something, but we don't know why he's like this. He's going to reveal it later, but he's concealing the reason, the shock. What was the shock that he had? That's the question we as readers have been forced to ask, and it's been concealed from us. And he says, I sometimes think if we knew all, we should be more glad to get away. And it's interesting, what does he mean by that? We knew all. It's almost like he's talking about like science. And again, there's links there to kind of like evolution and about the nature of man and things like that. It's quite big ideas, I think, that he's been thinking about. Jekyll is ill too, observed Utterson. Have you seen him? But Lanyon's face changed, and he held up a trembling hand, the adjective trembling there, showing his fear. I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll, he said in a loud, unsteady voice. I am quite done with that person, and I beg that you will spare me any allusion to one whom I regard as dead. So he regards Jekyll as dead, and he does not want to see or hear anything to do with Jekyll. So clearly, and also this unsteady voice, clearly that Lanyon, whatever this shock is, it has something to do with Dr. Jekyll, who also has shut himself away. And Utterson and us as the reader, we don't know why that is the case. We can start to suspect, but we don't know why. Tut, tut, said Mr. Utterson, and then after a considerable pause, can't I do anything? He inquired. We are 3 very old friends, Lanyon. We shall not live to make others. Nothing can be done, returned Lanyon. Ask himself. He will not see me, said the lawyer. So, Utterson being a good friend, is it anything I can do for you? That is Utterson's instinct. He wants to help his friends because he's a good man. But Lanyon says nothing you can do. But obviously, Jekyll will not see Utterson. I'm not surprised at that, was the reply. Some day, Utterson, after I am dead, you may perhaps come to learn the right and wrong of this. So he says to Utterson that you will one day, someday, learn about this. And I'm not spoiling things here, but at the end of the novel, Utterson's going to find out everything, and so are we as a reader. But just notice how this book really works as kind of a mystery. It's almost like it almost works like a detective novel in some ways, even though it's not about detectives, it's not about a singular crime. It has a real feel of kind of detective fiction here, where the real like who done it, the why done it, the how done it is hidden from us. I cannot tell you, and in the meantime you can sit and talk with me of other things. For God's sake, stay and do so. But if you cannot keep clear of this accursed that came up in Macbeth actually, like this kind of like unholy topic, then in God's name go, for I cannot bear it. Notice how he says God's name a few times. There's something about these men, when they experience whatever they've experienced, they sort of become a little bit more religious. Remember, it is quite a religious time they're living in, obviously. As soon as he got home, Utterson sat down and wrote to Jekyll, complaining of his exclusion from the house and asking the cause of this unhappy break with Lanyon. And the next day brought him a long answer, often very pathetically worded. So he gets a letter back from Jekyll, and sometimes darkly mysterious. Lovely little phrase there, in drift. So this is Jekyll's letter to Utterson. The quarrel with Lanyon was incurable, cannot be cured, no going back. Just make sure you say that. No going back. I do not blame our old friend, Jekyll wrote, but I share his view that we must never meet. So he agrees, we must never meet ever again. Whatever happened has been so bad that we can never meet again. I mean from henceforth to lead a life of extreme seclusion. So he's going to shut himself away, alone. You must not be surprised, nor must you doubt my friendship, if my door is often shut even to you. You must suffer me to go my own dark way. So he says, you must let me go. Let me go this dark way, this darkness that's in Jekyll. You must let me go this dark way. I have brought on myself a punishment and a danger that I cannot name. Again, lovely quotes there. A punishment, a danger, but this is all a mystery. We don't know what he means by that. This is a lovely quote as well. I think I put it in a quiz. If I am the chief of sinners, so people who have committed sins, committed acts against, against God. Think about the 7 deadly sins, like wrath and envy and lust, all those things. If I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. So he's saying I'm someone who committed lots of sins, but I've also suffered a lot too. And again, we get this idea of duality, that one man can both sin and suffer at the same time, and that we're not just all good or all bad. We're a mixture of those two things. We have different sides to ourselves. I could not think that this earth contained a place for sufferings and terrors so unmanning, and you can do but one thing, Utterson, to lighten this destiny, and that is to respect my silence. So again, like light the dark, he's asking Utterson to light the dark by respecting his silence. Utterson was amazed. The dark influence of HYDE had been withdrawn. By the way, lovely quote again, the dark influence of HYDE had been withdrawn. The Doctor had returned to his old tasks and amities, his kind of friendly meetings. Amities like friendly natures meetings. A week ago, the prospect had smiled with every promise of a cheerful and an honoured age, and now in a moment, friendship and peace of mind and the whole tenor of his life were wrecked. Almost like a shipwreck, his life is ruined. So great and unprepared a change pointed to madness. So he's thinking, Jekyll's gone mad, must have gone mad. But in view of Lanyon's manner and words, there must lie for it some deeper ground. So maybe it's not just madness, but again, massive mystery. What is the big mystery? This book is relentlessly teasing us with something we don't know about yet. A week afterwards, Dr. Lanyon took to his bed, and in something less than a fortnight, he was dead. So, big plot point. Lanyon dies. Just dies in one sentence. We don't see it. Just dies. He was right. He predicted his death, and he did die 2 weeks later. The night after the funeral, at which he had been sadly affected, that's a lovely way of saying basically he'd been crying at the funeral. But a Victorian man can't be seen to be crying his eyes out. He just must be sadly affected. Formal way of saying crying. Utterson locked the door of his business room. Another door getting locked there. Love doors in this book. I would say doors, by the way, are a motif. And a motif is like an image or idea that gets repeated throughout the book. Like a symbol. And sitting there by the light of a melancholy candle, so he's sitting by a sad candle, drew out and set before him an envelope addressed by the hand and sealed with the seal of his dear friend. So this is from Lanyon. Private. For the hands of J.G. Utterson, alone, all capitalized, and in the case of his predecease, to be destroyed unread. So basically, if this is for Utterson only, but if he dies, his predecease, then it should be destroyed and no one should read it. So the truth is in this letter, I think. The reason for why Lanyon died is in this letter. So it was emphatically superscribed, and the lawyer dreaded to behold the contents. So he wants to know, but he also fears the truth. So Utterson wants to know the truth, but he also fears it. I have buried one friend today, he thought. What if this should cost me another? And then he condemned the fear as disloyalty and broke the seal. So he condemns the fear of disloyalty and he breaks that seal. Within there was another enclosure, likewise sealed and marked upon the cover as not to be opened till the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll. So there's another letter inside this package and it says don't open till either, again, we've got that death or disappearance, not just death, of Jekyll. Utterson could not trust his eyes. Yes, it was disappearance here again. So that word disappearance, like that's odd. What's that about? Jekyll said the same thing. He keeps thinking he's going to go missing. Why? Here again, as in the mad will, which he had long ago restored to its author. So this is the same as that will from earlier on in the book. Here again, with the idea of a disappearance and the name of Henry Jekyll bracketed. But in the will, the idea had sprung from the sinister allegation of the man HYDE. It was set there with a purpose all too plain and horrible. Written by the hand of Lanyon, what should it mean? Like, this is a man he trusts. Like, HYDE could write that in a will, and he's like, oh, HYDE's evil. He would write that. But with Lanyon, he's even more confused. So lots of confusion here for Utterson. A great curiosity, again that key theme, curiosity, came on the trustee to disregard the prohibition and dive at once into the bottom of these mysteries. So he thought, I could read it now. But professional honour, so he's like, as a lawyer, and faith to his dead friend, so loyalty to his dead friend, were stringent obligations, and the packet slept in the inmost corner of his private safe. Classic Utterson, he will not open up this document until he's allowed to, because the note says he should only do it when Jekyll's dead or disappeared. Again, it's like tantalizing for the reader, like, oh my god, just open it. You could find out all the secrets now. But he doesn't, and he locks it away in his safe. It is one thing to mortify curiosity, another to conquer it, and it may be doubted if, from that day forth, Utterson desired the society of his surviving friend with the same eagerness. He thought of him kindly, but his thoughts were disquieted and fearful. He went to call indeed, but he was perhaps relieved to be denied admittance. Perhaps in his heart he preferred to speak with Paul upon the doorstep, and surrounded by the air and sounds of the open city, rather than to be admitted into that house of voluntary bondage, bondage because he's kind of tied himself into being in that house, Jekyll, and to sit and speak with its inscrutable recluse. So, by the way, just want to go back to this very beginning bit. He says it's one thing to sort of kill curiosity, but to completely conquer it is harder to do. So he's still curious about what's going on. Paul had indeed no very pleasant news to communicate. The doctor, it appeared, now more than ever, confined himself into the cabinet over the laboratory. So he's actually not just locked in his house. Within the house, he's put himself in one of the smallest rooms, this office over the lab, where he would sometimes even sleep. He was out of spirits. He had grown very silent. He did not read. It seemed as if he had something on his mind. Utterson became so used to the unvarying character of these reports that he fell off little by little in the frequency of his visits. So basically that last bit means Utterson stops visiting. Like, this is getting too weird. Don't know what's going on with Jekyll. It's all very confusing. It's worrying. It's troubling. And he stops going. Okay, there's only now 4 more chapters left in the book. The next one's incredibly short. We'll do that on Monday, where you'll read that by yourself on Monday. So that is the end of chapter 6. Obviously, the big news there: Lanyon is dead. So there's quite a lot's happened there. And now I'll return you back to Mr. Owen, the live variety.